pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing just a moment. We're going to observe a brief moment of silence for Barbara Cloutier, mother of our Council President, Kristen Cloutier, who passed away last Friday. Thank you. We are here today for a budget work session.
First, Heather.
Good morning. Good morning. Good evening. It feels like morning. Exactly. Couple housekeeping things. The list of adjustments that I had passed out at the last meeting, there were two formula errors there between negatives and positive numbers. So I have fixed those. When you get the final budget resolved, the total is the same, but if you're just trying to line them up one by one, you'll see some flip-flopping of some numbers and in the fringe benefit categories.
Is that it? The other issue I wanted to go over with you is I wanted to check in with you all to see where you were on the school budget. The way the process works, next Tuesday you will be voting on the budget that's been presented by the school committee. That comes fairly early in the budget adoption process. Is it the first thing we do?
After the public hearings?
Yeah, after the public hearing. So it's the first item that will be up. Approval of the school budget requires 4 votes. So I need, we would like to know going into next Tuesday where things stand, whether that's what's been presented is acceptable or not. Because if it isn't, the process gets a little more complicated in that the council would then have to determine what is an acceptable total for the school department. And then the school committee would have to meet fairly quickly to reallocate and decide where any of those cuts would have to be made in the various school articles, the detailed budget that they present, in order for us to stay on the May 8th schedule for the overall election. So I know there are at least some folks who have some concerns about the school budget, and there may be other questions about the school budget that we need to get information on, so I thought we'd better have a discussion of it tonight as opposed to next Tuesday when we're trying to take actual final action.
Councilor Cloutier.
So I've obviously missed a couple meetings. In my absence, the school budget remains at minimum required local share?
That's correct. School budget remains at required local share. There have been some minor changes, not very significant, that basically brought their increase down a penny. And they also picked up some city expenses from finance that brought our side of the budget down by a penny, roughly.
Councilor Liz.
Could we hear from our representative on the council on the school committee from your recommendation on that process? I know it was your first time through that, so you can share that and share your recommendation. That'd be great. Thank you.
Sure, I'm happy to. So we met over 8 meetings talking about the different articles that are involved in the school budget. There are overall 18, but some of them don't go towards the minimum required local share. And it's then up to us how it's going to be allocated. I'd say that we unanimously voted on the school committee to send it to council and approve the articles as they were presented. So I'd say that has the faith of the school committee behind it. And I think there was a lot of discussion and very lengthy discussion and thoughtful discussion about it. So I think I personally trust that process, the way it happened, and stand behind that budget.
Thank you.
Councilor Cloutier.
So I'm in favor of the school committee budget as presented.
Okay.
That's one.
1, 2, 3.
Councilor Bengill.
I think everybody knows I'm hugely not in favor of it. You know, the biggest thing is it's not a sustainable model. You know, it's 5 times our city side of it, and it's not presented correctly. It's not benefiting our teachers, it's not benefiting our students, and it's not benefiting our city. So I would, and it's not to say that the hard work wasn't put in and a lot of time wasn't put in, because it definitely was. But I think we can do better, and I think we owe it to the teachers, the students, and the city to do better, and to hold them to task for it, to do better. So I would urge us to not approve it.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman?
with all due respect, I'd like to ask Councilor Pettengill if he, what his recommendations would be to change it, to make it better for the students, for the school, for everyone. What would that look like?
It's a large question. To be honest, I've spent most of my time trying to dig through the data. One of the things that I have the hardest time believing is that our graduation rates going back from 2012 are stagnant within 1% of each other. And then from 2015 to 2016, we made a 6.8% jump in the 4-year graduation rate. Math is not my strong suit on the spot, but I know that those numbers don't jive. And then if you go back through the data, 2015, they tallied the 4-year and the 5-year graduation rate, and then 2014, they tallied the 4-year, the 5-year, and the 6-year. If you follow all 3 of those percentages, that is what they're saying the new graduation rate is. So it doesn't appear to line up. So I'm not saying it's incorrect data, but that's what it reads like.
Mr. Mayor, can I answer that? So how, I understand you're not happy with the graduation figures, and I don't think anybody is, and we all would like to see 100% or in the 90s or 80s, but how would not supporting the school budget and losing government funds help us to raise our graduation rate?
I think the better question is how is getting that money going to help us if we're not spending it and allocating it correctly? The lion's share of it goes towards new teachers, but they're not going into classrooms. If you look at the sheet that is put out for the ratios for it, there's a best of my knowledge, and I spent a lot of time looking at it on the state website. I've talked to Department of Education. There's no ratios for principals, library technicians, any of that stuff. If you go based on the sheet, we're heavy 3 library technicians, and they want to hire another one. And they're already over 2 or 3. They're putting too many bodies in classrooms, and he talks about wanting to bring the classroom ratio down. The recommendation from the state is 15 to 17 based on the grade range. We're already staffing at that level, and he wants to add more teachers to that. So now you're going to have 4 teachers in a smaller classroom with the model that he's pushing. It's going towards individual teaching, and there's no way. We've got 7,000 students, 6,000 students, I think, in the system roughly. We're going to hire 6,000 teachers? That's insane. We need to look at spending our money better.
And we're still not addressing, I think, and I agree with you about how, it might be a good exercise to try to think of outside the box a little bit, or how we can use our resources a little bit better.
Yeah.
But I just still don't see that losing all that federal money and losing all those people would help us. Maybe we can think outside the box at the same time as we're having enough people in the classrooms to see our ideas through or try new things, but all of a sudden to cut all these people, to have not enough or what seems like not enough positions isn't going to make new things easier. Maintain the status quo of personnel and use some new ideas maybe is what I'm thinking.
But it's not the status quo though. They're looking to add more positions. The status quo is fine. If you follow the budget sheet down on a lot of it, we spend more than Portland. Portland has more students than us spread across 3 districts. So if you lump it all together, we spend more than Portland does.
Sure.
You know, and the only area we don't is in special education. And I'm not advocating for cutting special education, not following IEPs, any of that stuff. We can take the existing pool of money and spend it. And I never said don't fund it for the minimum share, because if I believe they're asking for they're asking for more in it. I'd have to have the school budget book, but I think that the way the calculation added out, they're asking the minimum share is like 18.8, and they're asking for like 22 or something like that.
Oh, so they're
Just, I can clarify a little bit of that. The minimum local share doesn't cover all of their expenses. There's local incurred debt service, which is, I think, a couple $1 million, as I recall. That's on projects like the middle school project that we did the expansion and renovation, and that was completely on our dime with no state participation. Special education doesn't fall in there, and there may be a few other minor things.
There were some.
Adult ed.
Some adult ed, yeah.
But
So I
those
know
are
those
things that
two
don't
are-
affect the tax rate.
Pardon me?
Those are things that don't affect the tax rate.
No, they do affect the tax rate.
Exactly.
But
Okay,
they
so
are,
can you explain that then?
you could eliminate adult ed, and that would lower our tax rate. So what the number is that when he talks about required minimum local share, that's probably 90% of their tax rate. Then you have to pay the debt service on things like the middle school, which falls outside of the required payment, and adult ed, which isn't included in the formula. So there are add-ons that affect the tax rate over and above the required minimum local share.
But when we talk about, like the debt service stuff.
Can't cut that.
Right, there's no way to cut that.
Mhm.
And it sounds like for adult ed, that's where they made some of the cuts already.
They
And they
cut
use-
20,000,
That's where
they
that's-
substituted fund balance from adult ed for the $20,000 cut.
Right.
So they funded what was requested, but they used fund balance to make up a little bit rather than taxes. So I think those are the big distinctions.
Right. The local share, Council President, just to answer your question, the local share of capital improvements like the middle school and the Farwell addition and so forth, that are not part of the formula for minimum required subsidy, was $1,223,000. Our local share of adult ed is essentially $441,000.
But all of those things that are in debt service are things that this council at some time and some place approved for funding.
No doubt about it.
And we do not have the opportunity now to go back in time and say, oh, gee, guess we shouldn't have funded that because we don't want to pay the debt service on it now.
That would be true.
Thank you.
Councilor Leslie?
Yeah, I just had a suggestion about wanting other metrics than just graduation rate as, you know, an evaluation of success. And I don't know what that is necessarily, but I do think that I'd like to see a little bit more broad-ranged goals and objectives and other than graduation rates, which is important, don't get me wrong, but what other metrics might be also?
Well, I think that's something, obviously, the school committee has set goals and objectives. I don't know what those are. And I
Not
don't think-
entirely numeric, and evaluated in the way that graduation rate and a four-year CAGR might be. It's about 9 pages long, the goals, mission, and values document. So I don't know everything off the top of my head, but there's a lot of that.
Yeah, I
we're
mean,
struggling
I would suggest taking what, that the committee might think is most important, and then developing some sort of metric to see if you're reaching that goal.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, again, following up on that, maybe it would be useful for the school committee and the council to meet, to have a discussion around some of these points and get some of these concerns out, because I think there's a couple things going on here. One, obviously, is a feeling that do we have the mechanisms in place to measure performance coming out of the school department? And then I think there are probably some technical questions about how the budget works, because I think we agree, given our budget and comparing it with theirs, that the school budget's a little complicated. Sometimes maybe overly complicated. So they're trying to have a better understanding of some of these details. Because again, the difficulties councils always have, and I feel for councils dealing with these issues, is that you get to say yes, no over the big number, but you don't have a lot of control over anything below that number. So if Councilor Pettengill feels like more money should be being put in a certain area, there's no formal way for him to make that argument other than through the big number, and maybe the opportunity of sitting down with the school committee and having some of those discussions would be helpful.
Councilor Bean?
I agree that different metrics would be important. One of the things that I'm concerned about is how much, and this may not be, this isn't the time to discuss it. It might be the time when we get together with the school committee. And I haven't brought it up because I've always felt like budget time isn't the time to, through this budget cycle, wasn't the time to discuss it. But how much is proficiency-based education costing the school system? And isn't that one of the things we instituted to give us some kind of metric to find out if our students were meeting the goals? And I know there's a lot of talk about it. A lot of parents are upset about it. Some teachers are really upset because it upsets the flow of the classrooms, the education of the children. And having been a teacher for 40 years, I'm going to say I'm glad I didn't have to work when they had proficiency-based education, because it's not conducive to what I learned education was all about. And I've never spoken publicly about this, but I've been concerned about it, especially since the budget is high. And I'm thinking, don't we do proficiency calculations every day as teachers when we give little tests, and we evaluate students in different ways, like having them raise a yes or no to answers to questions, and you just kind of look around and see if everybody's getting the idea as you're teaching it. And that's the way to make sure that you're getting the idea across and proficiency across. And putting students in front of a computer in a crowded classroom, to me, doesn't do the job, and I'm wondering how much it costs us.
So I'm feeling a little fiery because I've had a rough week. So just a couple things. As somebody who was on the school committee for 3 years, one thing that has kind of like always stuck in my craw is when we get to this stage of the budget and we're talking about the school budget and people are finding fault with the school budget, and not a single one of those people has showed up to a school committee meeting, budget meeting. My process is always, if you have questions about things, you should be asking them along the way. You shouldn't be waiting until the end of a conversation to bring those things up. Number one. Number two, I feel like a lot of the conversations that we're having around this directly relate to decisions that are being made at a state level that are then sort of falling onto us as a municipality to sort of figure out. Proficiency-based learning is one of those things. It's a state mandate. There were no resources or money provided to us with that. We were expected to kind of implement that the best we could based upon what we already had. Hence, all of the problems that we're having with it now. I think it's important for us to remember that every dollar that we ask a school committee to go back and cut from minimum required local share results in a $3 loss of funding to our local school district. And to me, that is just irresponsible. I think we have a school committee in place that is probably as evenly distributed politically as it could possibly be. And based upon that, I have a large amount of confidence in the decisions that they've come to, the fact that they came to a unanimous decision on bringing this budget forward to us speaks volumes to me about the work that they've done and their ability to sort of come together despite those differences. And I really think that, you know, if we have issues with the way the formula works, those are issues that need to be raised at a state level. I think that turning this budget down is in some ways us trying to send a message to the state, and they are not listening. I mean, in case you haven't paid attention, they are not listening. And so, you know, trying to send that message is basically just taking resources away from our local school department to make a point, and I just don't support that.
Council Martin?
What I find irresponsible is taxing our fellow citizens more and more every year, especially when that tax rate increases faster than their ability to earn more, whether that be pay increases in the private sector or whether that may be an increase in their COLA on Social Security. I asked that question for a pointed reason last week, and the answer I got was 2%. Some of these percentages I'm not trying to do from memory, so excuse me if I get them wrong. School department was over 5% increase, county was 4% increase. The city has come in at exactly 0.56. Well, that because I'm acutely paying attention to that. I'm not acutely paying attention to what's going on at the school committee because that's the realm of the school committee. We're looking out for the people who are paying taxes to the city. I think the school committee understands that. And if they're paying attention to what's happening at the city council level in retrospect, they'd understand that the city keeps taking deep cuts. We're at 0.56. We're even below the growth rate, which I believe is approximately 0.78 on our assessments in the city. And that's been going on for years and decades. I can remember 30 years ago, a big push to fund schools more. And at the time, I agreed that it was necessary. And it probably very well was necessary. But it seems that that argument is used again and again and again, and we're not seeing the metrics, like I've heard used a few times tonight. The metric I'm concerned about is seeing vacant residential homes in this community because people have abandoned and left because they can't afford. We've heard the stories about people who are paying their taxes late because they can't afford it. They're asking for abatements, and that's going to increase more and more. I mean, the city side has obligations as well. We're not keeping pace with our combined sewer overflow projects and in many other areas. But if we have to keep biting the bullet on the city side at 0.56 so the school can raise it in excess of 5%, and it comes in at, if my math is correct, I remember this number from the last couple of days, 2.54, I think, is the averaged weight, not to the 3.
2.47. Close.
47, okay. That still is in excess of 2%, and for me, that's not acceptable. Maybe if the COLA was 3% this past year, I'd find it acceptable, but it wasn't. And as far as finding those areas, where there could be better efficiencies in the school department, that is best left to the judgment to the school board. That is their world. It's not ours.
Councilor Green?
I wasn't suggesting that I would not support the school budget because I'm planning to, but one of the reasons that I haven't spoken up before and felt that, it was never the time to bring up this proficiency, and we did have discussions on proficiency-based education too, is to your point, Councilor Cloutier, is that we have a school board or school committee that was duly elected, and they did what, they did their job and they worked hard, and we had to trust them. But we're at a point now where we're trying to find, we're trying to look outside the box and perhaps make suggestions, not necessarily orders, and I will support them in their decisions. But I think we do need to look at those kinds of things. We do need to explore how much the state is mandating and how much it's costing us to meet those state mandates, and without support from the state. Another thing I wondered about, and I don't have figures like Councilor Marcotte, I can't give you the figures, but I would like to know how much we would have to reduce, and I'm not saying this is something I'm supporting, I'm just saying let's just explore this, let's just brainstorm a little bit. How far would we have to go, how much would we have to take off the school budget to make it acceptable to people? And I can't give you a percentage. What did we say, 3%? I mean, what?
I think Councilor Marcotte was suggesting 2.
Or what was it last year? I mean, how much money would that be that we'd be taking out of the school budget? Do you know? Have you talked about that?
So we haven't spoken directly about that point, but there is the non-binding question that goes along with the school budget referendum. Is this too high, acceptable, or too low? And that is used to guide future budgets. And often it's acceptable and too low overcome too high as a section. And so
too high, yeah. Okay. It's still important, I think, to know the facts. If you know the facts that you're working with, I think you can make good decisions. And I know I told you I'm making this decision before I know the fact, because as I said, I think we have to trust the school committee. They were elected by, just as we want people to trust us, we were elected, and we're doing what we think is best, and they've talked about it a lot more than we have, and they've come to this conclusion. But that doesn't preclude our saying that we might have suggestions or thoughts about things. And did you come to a figure? I mean, I probably asked something like...
It's okay.
Last year, just so everybody knows, the school committee actually cut the tax rate by 12 cents, which was 1.2%. County went up 5.7%. The city side last year was 3.3%, for a net overall tax increase of 1.74%.
What was the school?
School actually cut the tax rate by 1.2%. That was because last year they got a over 15% increase in state aid. That was the year that the state made adjustments to eliminate the penalty that schools were getting for Title I funding. State used to deduct the Title I funding, which is aimed at disadvantaged students, from the amount we received. That went away. And I think they made an adjustment for something else that year, which also benefited us, and I don't remember the other factor, but there were 2 factors that resulted in us getting a significant increase last year in state aid.
Is that Title I funding, have they taken that penalty away?
That is a permanent change that was made last year. We are no longer being penalized for receiving Title I funds.
And so what made it be so high this year then, if things are the same as last year pretty much?
The big impact on local share this year was historically, the essential programs and services model was always technically reduced from 100% to 97%. This year it went to 100%. Given that the state's funding is theoretically fixed, although you may have noticed they have not yet adopted the school funding, so who knows, was theoretically fixed in last year's, in the biennial budget, all of that increase fell to the local share. So that's why, and for many school districts, in fact, the majority of school districts are over the local share, so they didn't have to worry about it. We were not, and since we're such a large receiver, that has a double whammy on us. It's both that we were at required local share, and unlike some school departments that get maybe 10, 15, 25% of their funding from the state, we get 75% of our funding from the state.
Counselor Bean, if I could, maybe to help you process the numbers a little bit. Back in FY 17, 2 fiscal years ago, the school portion of the tax rate was $10.30. We are now looking at the school portion for FY 19 at $10.72. So you're talking a 42-cent increase, or an average of 2.1% between the 2 fiscal years, which normalizes the peaks and valleys kind of a little bit by looking at the total. It takes the excess, I shouldn't say excess, it takes the surplus that we received in the current fiscal year, FY 18's budget, takes that into consideration, as well as offsets the increase in the required local share that we're experiencing in 19. So to look at the 2 years together is probably more indicative of what is happening with the school budget instead of taking them in isolation. So that may be a better way to think about it, as a 2.1% average between the 2 years.
And if we talk money, how much money?
I can tell you that in a minute. I'm kind of doing these on the fly.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
In the meantime,
I will-
Councilor
I will-
Cloutier?
Yeah.
I will add one, while Heather's doing this, one little editorial comment. If the city council wants to weigh in on educational issues at the state level, it has the authority to do that. I mean, I will tell you, in my time in Maine, when I first came to Maine, those many years ago, we were always in the top 3 or 4 in the country in terms of educational attainment. We no longer are. And in the time I've been here, I'm going to say we've adopted 4 or 5 different approaches driven by the state toward how we should educate students. I think that lack of consistency has cost us, both in terms of student performance and in terms of out-of-pocket funds, because we're reinventing our educational system every 2 or 3 years. And I think that lack of consistency is really undermining what we're trying to accomplish here, and I think the state needs to get that message. Pick something and stick to it, or get out of our way and let us do it. My editorial comment for the night.
So you've given me time to calculate, which was good. I appreciate that. So over the 2 years, the net income, the net impact on the tax rate over a 2-year period is $1,019,000, round numbers, or $510,000 per year. If you look at the net impact on the tax rate, which is what I think everybody's focusing on right now, so that's probably the easier way to put it. So you're looking at, like I said, $510,000 per year for a 2-year period, or a 2.1% average.
Thank you.
Councilor Cloutier?
So, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Ed, but I just, we talk about, getting more money from the state for education, and so many people are like, oh, that's so great, now we can, the tax rate is gonna go down. And actually what happens is the more money we get from the state, the more they require us to raise in local, minimum required
Not
local share.
necessarily, no. The way the formula works is it computes how much should be spent
Per student.
to produce a student that meets the state standards. So that's a set number. Let's say, just for sake of argument, it's $10,000. If the state is now providing $5,000 and we're providing $5,000, and the state increases their contribution to $6,000, we can drop ours to $4,000. What we've been struggling with in recent history is that during the recession, the state gave us a pass on the required local share. And during those years, what we were contributing fell further and further behind what was being required. So we had to spend 3 years making that up. You'll remember those 3 painful years where we were looking at something in the range of $800,000 a year just to get back to required local share. So we finally get back to required local share, and we had, that showed, look how well things worked last year. And then all of a sudden the state says, oh, new rule, instead of 97, we're going to 100. So the only way that wouldn't have affected local share was if the state had made up that 3%, which would have required the state to come up with another $100 million statewide. So, and then formula is adjusted from year to year, so obviously the formula is affected by inflation. It's also affected by labor market. So there are adjustments. I think we're at 99% at the state level as far as teacher salaries, whereas Portland's over it, and if you're up in Aroostook County or a more rural area, you might be further below it. So there are those kinds of adjustments in the formula, and it's recalculated every year. But if the state provides enough money to take care of that inflationary impact plus more, that lowers the local required share.
Councilor Wright?
What I was originally going to say is moot, but I think I hope it's become clear that the school committee budget process is very different from the city budget process, and the mandates from the state and playing the game with the state basically is a huge part of it, and when we're looking at educating our children and all of our children in Lewiston and trying to have an upward trajectory of the educational attainment in the area, it's a game you don't want to play sometimes, because you don't want to disadvantage any group of students or particular student. And so funding at the minimum local, that's what we have proposed, that's what we're coming to the council with, and the school committee is supportive of. And I do want to note that participation from the council in this process, I think, can happen at any time, and I think it would be very smart to set up outside of the budget process time together. From my limited experience on both sides, there's very different approaches, and if we could attempt to unify that a bit more, I think there would be less dissent among the two. We're doing the best we can with the information we have, and then you all get just a tiny droplet of that information as well. So I think the more time that we can understand each other and have trust in each other too, which is a huge component of public service I've found, the better off we're all going to be in putting this really specialized work into others' hands.
Councilor B.
I think that was very well said, and that's where I was headed, but I didn't say it. Thank you for saying that. I think that's where what we ought to do. We ought to trust our school committee, but I do believe that we need to either get together more often or ask the school committee to see if they can come up with some new ideas. We need to talk about what's going on, and that way we can have a better budget season next year, maybe. The other thing I wanted to say, and you mentioned that too, and thank you for that, is the state mandates. It seems as though it's just the local school systems are not functioning, they're constantly having to meet certain state mandates, and I just wonder what happened to local control of education. And also, I guess there's another mandate that we're going to be talking about that's coming up, is the consolidation mandate, because it is a state mandate in the sense that if we don't consolidate, we lose money, we lose state money. It's a strong arm method, and it's too bad that we have to meet so many state mandates. I think that's something we ought to look at.
I think most people would be shocked when they realize that probably 80% of the school committee's work is on policies that have to be designed to meet what the state is requiring it to do.
It's getting worse, I think.
Oh, there's no question. If you watch in every legislative session, there are a series of efforts made at the legislature to pass legislation requiring local school districts to do X, Y, Z in addition to what they're currently doing.
Right.
That's a regular routine occurrence at the state. And it seems like if somebody can't get something done at the local level in their own school district, they run to Augusta and get a statewide or attempt to get a statewide mandate.
It's a scary amount if you follow it and see what they try to push through in the schools. It's a scary amount that gets up to that level every single year.
And it tends to take time and effort away from some of the basic stuff that school departments are trying to do. You know, you only have so much time in a day, and every time you add something, you have to take it away somewhere else.
Well, we're in agreement on that.
The other thing that I would say in regard to state mandates is, so we think about it affects the school district at the administrative level, as we have to respond and put budget in for whatever those programs are. And then I was struck by one day of professional development, which is the way that we train our teachers. We bring them into school with their children there for a day and work with them on whatever that new mandate is. It's something like $200,000 for that singular day of professional development, and it's necessary because we need to get all our teachers on the same page and in compliance with the way that we're doing things. And if you add technology on top of it, it's just it can really snowball. You know, the change to proficiency-based diplomas started part of that, but there's additional stuff across the board, and the merits of that need to be weighed at the state level, I'd say, because that's where the policy is being handed down from, and we have to be responsive to it. We've heard a lot about the extra complication that Lewiston students experience as a high level of social and emotional needs here, so that's not taken into account in the funding formula at all in that particular way, but it's just additive on top of these other things that we're working towards. Stuff.
Do you have what you need?
Doing a quick count, I seem to see there are four folks who are, at least four, who are in favor of or willing to vote to pass the school budget on. So that's basically what I needed. So if anybody has anything else they would like to know before next Tuesday, please let us know, and we'll try to get that information for you. With that, we can get back to simple things like huge amounts of capital money.
Yes.
Yes, I've already passed out the sheet regarding the LCIP. That was at your desk when you came in. As a reminder, we started out the whole capital improvement program process, and I'm only focusing on the impact that affects the debt limit. It seemed like there was consensus amongst the water, sewer, and stormwater LCIP projects, so I'm kind of putting those to bed. So as a reminder, we started out the LCIP, FY9 LCIP, with $15,095,820 worth of projects that impact are attributed to the 80% debt limit. That put us $5,068,471 over our limit this year, which was a little bit in excess of $7 million. Going through the process, I know the school committee met on this, as well as the departments and the city administrator. We kind of went through, and you will see since that time we've deferred or eliminated, more likely deferred, $2,459,350 worth of projects. And you can see them outlined and listed under that deferred column. We are also recommending $2,413,470 be funded from fund balance. That is in addition to the fund balance list that I passed out last Thursday that totaled about 2.14, which means in total, between the two pieces, between the operating side and this list, we are looking at funding $4,557,203 from fund balance.
And do not count on being able to do that every year.
And it takes
That
us,
is a lot of money to spend from fund balance in 1 year.
and it takes us right down to that 10%. I think I have $4,300 left. So, and it, oh, I'm sorry.
That number you just said, does that appear on the sheet?
No, it's the two pieces that you have.
Could you give me that number?
Yep, $4,557,203.
I lost you somewhere.
$4,557,203. When you get your appropriation resolve on the May 1st meeting, Counselor, you will have a list that totals that number. Okay? And to the city administrator's point, obviously, it cannot be anticipated that we will do this again next year. It depends on how things are going. We have since obviously adjusted revenues to kind of reflect what we are getting in, so we're not as conservative on the revenue side. Expenditures are kind of right where we're budgeting, so the surpluses that we were receiving, particularly in vehicle excise tax, I don't anticipate having that anymore. So again, the word of caution out there. The essentially fourth column talks about projects that are funded through other sources. So those total $706,000, and down at the bottom you will see a mini little reconciliation that says we have about $5,001,000 coming from
501,000.
Yes, sorry, 501,000. What's another $1 million?
Another 5 million, really.
It sounded good, though.
It really did, yes.
Coming from prior year bond surplus. And kind of what that is made up is we've been having some very large premiums on our bond sales, so we have that money available to us. And that has been council's direction in the past, is as we get close to adopting the LCIP, review those fund availabilities and see what can be funded through that in lieu of bonding. So that covers about $500,000. The prior year fund balance, that number should look familiar to everybody. That's our sidewalk plow that we funded not too long ago. And then $75,000 is funded through, or slated to be funded through CDBG when you adopt the CDBG budget next Tuesday, or proposed adoption of the CDBG budget for Marcotte Park, which leaves the remaining projects to be bonded of $9,517,000, which puts us $2,489,651 over the limit, or we're 35% over the bond limit.
So my first question's on the airport tractor and the 911. Are those our share of that, or is that the full?
Those are our share of those.
Nice tractor for $400,000. Okay. And I guess
I believe that tractor's also capable of doing things like plowing.
Correct. Sweeping,
I
plowing.
seem to remember that from my days in the
Yep.
airport board. I've asked for that before. My two concerns on here, if I'll start off, because we are $2.7 million over the limit, or, 2.4. It's improved. Why are we renovating a school that we are about to close or use for something that is yet to be determined to the tune of $450,000?
The amount that's shown, I looked that up, and if you look at the detail in the capital plan, that is actually the first step in renovating the Longley School for an alternative high school to use as a, similarly to what they're doing with Star Academy at the middle school, a location to bring kids in who do not function well in a large environment. So the money that's being talked about there is, I believe, primarily for initial engineering,
Windows.
and replacing windows and putting in some security systems in anticipation that the following year there will be some additional renovations required on the mechanical systems. It's page 80-something, I think.
87.
87. So it's really an effort to start the process of getting ready to reutilize that building as an alternative location for high school students.
Okay, I mean, that's one area of concern I have. The other, are we going to be able to start construction in this bond period of the new Sabata Street Fire Station, or would it be prudent to possibly bond half of that this year and bond half
I
of it
will have a
next
better
year?
idea of that in the very near future after I've had a chance to talk to the owner of the property, which I'm doing later this week.
Those
So
are the only-
I can get an answer back to you later. The one caution that I'll throw out there is I also looked at what happens if we defer some of this stuff into next year, what's sitting out there waiting for us. And next year, and again, you can look at your LCIP and see this is a somewhat simplified list. We'll be looking at our share of the airport runway reconstruction, which is about $500,000. The radio replacement project at LA 911, assuming the 800 megahertz system is the direction we go, that would be a $3 million project, plus or minus. We would like to, and this obviously would be up to the council, we would like to reconstruct Birch Street. It's in pretty bad shape. It goes right by the new high school, the new fields, obviously the Colisee. It's kind of one of the main arteries through that portion of town. That's $825,000. You've got our annual street program at $2.8 million. Equipment replacement at $1.2 million. So right off the top, we're looking at about $8 to $9 million worth of projects. And then the schools have another $1.7 million, some of which is completion of projects that would start this year, and some additional projects. So we're looking at about 10.6 next year. So if you move a chunk of that $3 million over, it's got to be paid for sooner or later. But I'll have a better idea, I hope, within a couple weeks of the status of how quickly we can actually get to construction of the Sabata Street Station prior to the 15th, when this will be adopted.
Okay. Does the 320 we're adding to Riverfront Island, added to what we have in the account already, come close to where the bids came in for the bridge?
Yeah, it comes close. And we're hoping, just so everybody's aware, we have about $600,000 available that we were going to use for the bridge. Bids came in at a little bit over $1 million. We only got one bid. We think the bidding environment was very bad because all the contractors were very busy at that time. Plus, we were trying to get that bridge installed prior to summer events in the park, so it was a very tight timeline. So the decision was made to come back and rebid it later this year, looking toward fall construction, where we hope we'll get a better price. So I can't tell you, the $600,000 was about the estimate for that project. If it comes in at 600,000, we'll obviously have some money left to do some other things if we want. We have talked on a number of occasions about continuing the improvement of the walkway between the pedestrian bridge into the park and the pedestrian bridge over to Auburn. So that would probably be something we would be looking at. But
Council Marquardt?
I likewise have concerns about the $450,000 for the Longley School renovations. I have a bigger concern with the $2.5 million over the bond limit. Actually, on the way over here tonight, I heard the recap on the stock market fall today, and in part it was due to 10-year treasuries going up over 3%. So interest rates are on the rise. If we're going to do the borrowing, it should probably be this year. I would suggest that we borrow the 3.3 for the fire station, if at all possible. It'd be nice if we could get that estimate down for the need. The same way for the riverfront island implementation. If it's unnecessary to get the bridge done, I don't think we should be just reallocating it to another project, just because it was there, especially when we're $2.5 million over the debt repayment. It would be nice if the development department over the next year really kicks it into high gear and increases our assessment values in this town so that that can take the place of increasing the mill rate as we do every year.
just, I'm hopeful that 3.3 million for the fire station will be enough not only to handle the construction, the purchase of the land, the design and the construction of the Sabata Street Station, but to allow us to have money left over that will let us acquire the property for the next, which will be Main Street.
Didn't we bond last year for architectural and engineering on that station?
There was some money, and I'm hoping that that will be enough for us to at least acquire the property and have a part and fund part of the architect and engineering, probably not the whole amount.
Okay.
And hopefully the city council can take a bigger role in what this building is going to look like,
Oh, yeah.
because I've heard or seen a few little bits and pieces, but do we go with what some people have called Taj Mahal? Do we scale it down a little bit now, but construct it and design it in such a way where it can be expanded later if necessary?
That's currently our plan. I mean, there were two approaches taken. One was for a 3-bay station, one was for a 2-bay station. We certainly we'll look at the 2-bay station. We don't see a need for 3, but allow for the potential of future expansion if necessary. I think a 2-bay station will serve us for 20 or 30 years.
Well, a 3-bay station may not necessarily be out of the question to design and even put the slab down. We just don't need to outfit that portion of the building right now.
Correct.
So that we're not paying higher prices later for the construction materials that would be involved. That would be one approach.
Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Are we okay with being over the bond limit?
I'm not.
Takes 5.
And we will need 5 votes, so if we could do a quick counting of the beans here.
I vote for. Approve the bond.
Approve it over
Approve
the
the bond.
limit.
So
Councilor Clutie.
quite honestly, in looking at this list, I don't see, other than what we've talked about, a lot to cut here.
I would agree.
What are the ramifications? Oh, no, really.
Councilor.
Could you illuminate the school-wide roof access question that came before school committee? We were going to try to split it into 2 years and...
Right, and
Okay.
he ended up saying only one. That's why it's back up to the 97,000.
Okay. So we tried to get that down, but couldn't?
Well, he wanted to spread it out between 2 fiscal years,
But then it would be less than 50.
which
1,000.
falls
Okay.
back onto his fund balance or his operating budget.
Okay, thank you.
And what are the ramifications of being over the bond?
The ramification is that it will increase our principal interest payments in first future years, and the intent of the limitation has been to drive those down. That limit was 97% for years, and then it was increased to 80% 5-6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. Heather has the numbers, as always. And it has been successful in that we have dramatically reduced the general fund debt, particularly the interest owed over time. And I think, as we've talked about a couple times, it's getting tougher with some of the capital needs that we're looking at in the future, particularly the fire stations.
What we don't want to get to a point of is where we have been with the airport, and I know on the county side where we've deferred so much stuff that it comes home to roost in another 4 or 5 years. We don't want to be in that position either.
That's why we're here now.
But
And
to
I
some
would-
extent,
ways.
because of the recession, and yes.
And I would again love at some point to get some of the recurring capital like street paving and equipment replacement into the operating budget. But that require, we just haven't been in a position to do that, because that would require an impact on the tax rate or other reductions elsewhere.
So essentially, it raises our interest rate.
That's correct. I mean, if you do $2 million of street paving a year and you borrow for 10 years and you do it each year, by the time you get to year 11, you're paying $2.5 million, or maybe more depending on interest rates, to do $2 million worth of work.
I mean, quite frankly, one of the things, and it was a strategic decision, and it's kind of like geeky financing here, so kind of just
Here we go.
bear with me. The savings that we were reaping from doing all of the refundings and the very low interest rate. So you heard me talk about the high and the low, and that we've saved almost $6 million worth of interest, from the peak to the valley, and that's within the last, 10 years or so. What it's allowed us to do is and at the council initiative, do strategic things like paying off the taxable component of the Colisade debt. That was huge. That saved us about $2.1 million right there, give or take. It also allowed us to amortize our debt much, much quicker. So you talk about, we used to be on average a 15-year payoff. So think about taking your mortgage from a 15-year mortgage to an 8-year mortgage. That's what we did with all our city debt. And the pros and cons to that is we're saving a lot of interest, but it unfortunately artificially decreases this calculation. Because if we were back to the normal amortization period, these principal payments, when you took the 3-year average, the 3-year average would be higher than it is now. So I agree to Councilor Marcotte's point that we never want to get back to where we were, and I think the mayor had said that as well. But you have to understand why our 3-year average is this low. And it's because it's been strategic initiatives up to this point.
Because I think at one point it was up over 9 million.
Yeah, I think it was closer to 10
Closer
to
to
11
10.
million when we started this venture. So the pro of it is we've made huge, huge strides on our debt service. And it's something that I keep bringing up quite frequently because it is such a, the rating agency talks about it in a positive way. Our financial advisor talks about it in a positive way. You see it when you look at any graphical presentation we present on our debt service.
But the urban myth is still out there that we have a lot of debt.
Bingo. And now we are
Story.
coming to the point where we're going to need some debt to do the next wave of initiatives. So it's going to be up to the council to decide, is that initiative worthy of increasing the limit?
Council Marcotte?
What I'd like to see is a chart that shows our debt that the city of Lewiston is responsible for. So when you talk about the building of Robert V. Connor's school, I'd like to have that stripped out. And having a 10-year chart on what that number has been, where it is now.
Okay, so using today's as the 0 and going 5 years either way?
Well, whatever the number was 10 years ago.
Okay,
Because I know that the numbers were in the high six figures, like
Yep.
150 million. And that's an awesome number when you consider per capita and Lewiston's ability to pay based on our per capita income levels in the city. And I'm more interested in how that looks on paper.
yep, I already have that from the past, so I'll add a couple years out so you can kind of see where we're headed, especially now that we've bonded the Connor School. And then that way, it should meet your needs. If not, just shoot me an email otherwise.
Because I'm envisioning a chart that I have, I'm not sure if it exactly mirrors what I'm asking for. But
Okay, all right.
I can share that chart with you.
Okay.
Okay. If anybody has any other questions or issues with any of the capital stuff, let us know. The plan is to bring that to you folks on the 15th.
So are we meeting on Thursday?
No.
No. We are all done except for the voting on next Tuesday.
Sounds great. Council Marcotte?
I have a question. I realize that the special meeting item on the agenda didn't happen because of the vote last night. But I heard earlier something about the too high or too low question. I don't remember seeing that on the warrant this year.
They put that on,
It
I
is
think.
on the May 8th.
Yeah.
It is?
It
might not
be on
there
because it's.
Yes, it is on the ballot. It's an optional question. It's a non-binding question to do the too high, too low, or acceptable.
Okay, and it was on our warrant when we
I
voted on that?
believe it was, because all we do, Mike, is we just take the warrant from the previous year and update the dates, and we've had that question on there for at least 1, if not 2 years.
Unless I was looking at something lengthier on this question, and it didn't include it, maybe that's what I'm...
Right, you've seen a couple of different election warrants for the May 8th election, and then the tentative June 12th election that is still up in the air, right.
Yeah, it is possible that you may still get a chance to call that June election on the regional question, because they're trying to make arrangements to have the state employee to come up to meet with the school committee next week,
May 7th. May 7th,
in
2 weeks.
in 2 weeks. So, and if that happens, we could potentially be calling that election for the June election.
And we need how many days, 30 days, or...
30 days for absentee ballots, right. So absentee ballots would have to be available May 11th. So we'll need to know, I mean, from the school, obviously, the morning of May 8th, and we'll make it work if needed.
And Kathy doesn't even charge extra for all this help she gives the school
Right.
committee.
Back and forth, back and forth.
Not this year.
Yeah, not yet. All right, thank you.